Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Military Families and Child Support Custody and Visitation. We're pleased you're able to join us today. I'm Katie Mason, Policy Associate with the National Conference of State Legislatures Children and Families Program. Today we will address military and veteran families and the unique challenges they face in the child support system. While all parents who live apart from their children face parenting challenges, military families deal with deployments or other lengthy separations. Accordingly, they must plan for their children's financial, medical, and emotional support needs, making sure they are met before, during, and after deployment. States are using a variety of policies and programs to support military families, including establishing and modifying child support orders to reflect fluctuations in income, revising custody and parenting time provisions to allow for parents to remain engaged while deployed, and providing supportive services to military parents upon returning from deployment to help them reconnect with their children and civilian lives. Today we will hear about 4 states and how they are assisting military and veteran families. Today's webinar will include a quick overview of our organization, the National Conference of State Legislatures, and a refresher about some of the projects that we are working on. We will then cover some legislation from the 2012 and 2013 sessions. Then Michael Hayes will speak about Texas Heroes. Followed by his remarks, we will hear from Dan Savage, who will speak about El Paso County's efforts to engage military families. Finally, we will share some insights from Representative Cliff Rosenberger from Ohio and Representative Tanya Pullen from Kentucky, who shared their perspectives on military families from the legislative lens. We attempted to get them to be on this webinar live. However, with their legislative work, they were not able to join us. There will be time at the end for questions. This webinar and PowerPoint will be available as archived material on the NCSL website. Today, we are pleased to have Michael Hayes and Dan Savage joining us. Michael is the Deputy for Family Initiatives in the Child Support Division of the Office of the Attorney General in Texas, where he leads a multidisciplinary team of project developers, curriculum designers, program specialists, educators, and attorneys, affectionately known as the warm and fuzzy compass of child support. His work in child support includes the development of statewide prevention education programming for teens, perinatal family support service interventions for unmarried couples, court, workforce, and child support collaborations to help unemployed non-custodial parents find work and pay child support, enhanced child support and parenting legal resources for military and veteran families, co-parenting resources for couples in the child support system, and family violence collaborations to help survivors of intimate partner violence access the child support system safely. Also welcome Dan Savage. Dan is currently the Deputy Project Manager of the El Paso County Child Support Services. He has 10 years of prior experience in child support, including 4 years as the Child Support Administrator for Larimer County, Colorado. Dan is a veteran whose prior experiences include 15 years as a Veteran Service Representative with the Department of Veterans Affairs in the San Francisco and Seattle regional offices. He also has 20 years as a marriage and family therapist in California, Washington, and Colorado, with a wide variety of client populations. Thank you for joining us. Now I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about NCSL's work in child support and how we can help legislators and legislative staff when it comes to state child support programs and policies. NCSL is a bipartisan organization that represents the 50 state legislatures and the territories. We provide research and technical assistance, lobby on behalf of states before Congress, and provide trainings on legislative processes and other resources to help state legislators and their staff be effective and successful. Our organization covers a wide range of issues, anything you'd find at the state capitol, including child support. NCSL does not take any positions on state legislation. Our child support project has been hard at work developing a number of online state child support resources, including a Child Support 101 publication and a legislative database for all 2012 and 2013 bills. We are here to provide legislators and legislative staff with the latest research, connect them with their peers in other states who are doing innovative and interesting things, convene and facilitate meetings with other stakeholders and experts in the field, and we can do all of this with the help of technology. We even have the resources to come to your state to provide on-site support. Michael's going to discuss a number of the challenges and complexities that military families face in the child support program during his presentation. So I'm going to briefly cover some legislative actions from the 2012 and 2013 sessions. During the 2012 session, 9 states and the District of Columbia enacted or amended laws specifically dealing with child custody and visitation orders for deployed military families. Many of the bills created expedited processes by which temporary custody and visitation orders could be created or modified in order to ensure the least disruption to the parent-child relationship when one parent is an active service member. Increased involvement of non-custodial fathers and mothers in their children's lives often increase the likelihood of those parents meeting child support obligations. Studies show specifically that increasing father involvement in their children's lives is linked to more financial support of children. Several states also created an opportunity for deployed parents to transfer their visitation rights to a third person for the duration of their deployment, like a grandparent or another third party that the child knows, and of course would be in the best interest of the child. Like many of the laws already on the books, these laws expedite hearings, allow for telephonic and electronic communication with the court, or require a deploying parent to share information with the court and the non-deploying parent. As a side note, in 2011, 4 states passed similar legislation. For your reference, here are the bills and chapter numbers for the 2012 enacted legislation. NCSL's Child Support Project will be releasing a report soon summarizing all child support legislation for 2012, so stay tuned for that. In 2013, 12 states have proposed legislation, with New Jersey having already enacted a bill. This legislation is similar to that passed in 2012. Of note is a new piece of uniform legislation, the Uniform Deployed Parents Custody and Visitation Act. This Uniform Act, drafted by the Uniform Law Commission, was approved by the American Bar Association's House of Delegates in early February. 4 states have introduced this act this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Michael Hayes. Michael?
Thank you, Katie. I very much appreciate being invited to be part of the webinar today. Thanks also to my colleague Dan Savage in Colorado Springs. Learned a lot from him, and so I'm glad to be giving this presentation. Just to frame the Texas HEROES project, which HEROES is an acronym which we love in child support, right? To help establish responsive orders ensuring support for children in military families. Somebody joked that I should get the award for stretching an acronym as far as you could go. But the background for this project, for those of us who've worked in the child support arena for a number of years, many child support agencies, if not most states, have long recognized that some parents in our caseloads have extra challenges that make it difficult for them to comply with their child support obligations. And so state programs have innovated with projects to help with reentering. So parents who've been in state prisons who are reentering into their families' lives, or employment programs for low-income obligors, child support payors, teen parents, and et cetera. And it was a few years ago that we came to this recognition that military parents and veterans had a set of unique challenges, and we'd long been overlooking those challenges. We'd assumed, when a parent is in the military and has a child support obligation, for a state just to do a wage withholding order and collect that child support, it's a fairly administrative process. But what we'd overlooked were the kind of range of challenges that military parents have and the scope of the issue. So just to give the background on the scope of the issue, when we first started looking at our caseload in Texas, we found that about 25,000 cases in our caseload were active duty military with active child support cases. And in 2010, that equated to $156 million in DFAS wage withholding orders in Texas alone. So it's a sizable population. It's a lot of money. We then we drilled down to look at some of the problems in our caseload, and just among 1,300 OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom vets in 4 Texas counties, those 1,300 vets owed $24 million in arrears as of 2011. So we knew, based upon some of the data, that there were some problems, something going on. And so just to give you the challenges that we've identified or have been identified for us as we've gone through this project. So the challenges unique to military families, and I'm going to connect them then to child support in my next slide. So multiple deployments, and in particular the pay changes that go along with deployment and combat status, special duty pays, those kinds of things. The extended absences, year-long, 11 months to 13 months absence during deployment. The higher divorce rate among military families has been well reported in the newspapers. Change of duty station, so living in one state for 2 years, 3 years, moving to another state, international duty station. The high unemployment rate for vets, and in particular young vets, tracking the unemployment rates for soldiers coming out after OIF and OEF, and then the health problems after combat, both physical injuries and PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And then one other challenge that's unique to military families I didn't put on this list, but that is very much present in the child support arena, and that is military regulations as relates to family support and how those may interact with state family codes and child support arrangements. So what are the connections to child support in particular? Pardon me. So you've got interstate and international child support enforcement and child support order modifications, and likewise interstate and international child custody and child visitation enforcement and modification. There's a lot of confusion about the difference between a military allotment and a child support order, and is paying your allotment, does that meet your obligation to provide child support? Obviously, parenting time conflicts and interstate child custody, that's heightened by these periods of extended absences during deployment, and the kind of an initial order for visitation or access may no longer be as workable or appropriate after a year-long deployment. Paternity establishment and military benefits for the large number of unmarried soldiers who are having children, and trying to make that connection for their benefits to their child. Order modification, both when we've got service members who are exiting the service and they go from their active duty status to maybe some short period, or in other cases extended periods of unemployment, and an order that was set while they were getting their military pay and now are on a very different earning capacity. And then service-related disability benefits and child support calculations, and in particular how VA benefits get calculated as resources for the purposes of determining child support enforcement. So that's kind of the way that challenges of military families connect to child support in particular. And for those who are on the webinar who are in legislative roles, one of the ways that these things are going to show up are as complaints, that you're likely to hear from your military or veteran constituents in connection to child support. And probably the three most common complaints that you would get are VA benefits and BAH, the housing allowance, and BAS being counted in resources for purposes of determining child support. And there's some debate and maybe some urban legend, in fact, about how that those things can't be counted in some places. Paternity defaults, in particular if you've got a service member who's deployed and a paternity action is brought while they are deployed, and whether the protections of the Service Member Civil Relief Act are adequately applied in those situations, and then just the length of time that takes for cases to be worked, and that's because so many military cases are involving crossing of state boundaries or international boundaries. So thanks to a grant from the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, the Texas Heroes Project was started about 3 years ago to do these four primary, or to reach these four primary objectives, and that was to provide comprehensive, personalized assistance to military and veteran parents who are having a hard time navigating the child support system, complying with their child support obligation, or having trouble seeing their children. Providing a family-centered approach to those cases, so thinking about the whole family, not just the person to whom child support's owed or the person who is supposed to be paying child support. Moving complex cases forward, so looking at those complex interstate, international cases and be able to move them through the child support process. And then finally, educating stakeholders and the military family population. So thinking about stakeholders both within the military and the civilian world, state child support programs, the private bar, and the judiciary. The way we have done that is kind of through three primary activities. One, the first is building partnerships with VA Mental Health, Texas Veterans Leadership Project, which is a workforce project, our Texas National Guard, partnering with the JAG Corps at the military installations in Texas, working with a wide range of veterans organizations, both at the community level, like veterans roundtables that exist in a number of areas across the state of Texas, and at a state level with the Texas Veterans Commission. The second kind of focus that we've had, and that is by providing high-touch services for military parents who are coping with unemployment, mental health, or general stresses related to military service. So really taking those cases out of the high volume approach that most state child support programs have to take, just given our caseloads, and being able to provide that kind of high touch service. And then finally, kind of a more population-based approach, and that is through education to reach the population of veterans and service members. So just a brief description of what each of those kind of things looks like. I'm going to talk about our high-touch services and what that entails. So we have three attorneys who all they're assigned to do is to working military and veteran cases. So we have the specialized case review and handling. So these attorneys really spend a focused time working these cases. We do some specific outreach to veterans who are in non-compliance, and that non-compliance puts them at risk of being brought before the court for some kind of sanctioning in the courts. So some identifying of cases in our caseload where you can see long-term patterns of non-payment and reviewing them, doing outreach to veterans to find out what is going on. And oftentimes that reveals a veteran who maybe their only source of income is disability, or they maybe have not even gotten a disability benefit yet and they're struggling with employment. Another activity in our high-touch services are outreach to our interstate and international contacts, so that developing kind of a network from state to state and country to country to be able to resolve some of the issues around whatever it could be as mundane as getting a certified pay record from when a service member was in one jurisdiction and now are in Texas, or vice versa. We're in Texas or now in another jurisdiction, and they're trying to get credit for a certain amount of payments that they previously made. Referrals for behavioral health and unemployment services, so recognizing that noncompliance could be more than just willful noncompliance, and that treatment for PTSD or traumatic brain injury needs to take precedent over their child support obligation, there needs to be some kind of modification while they're in treatment. And then finally, to serve as kind of a subject matter expert, both with the private judiciary bar and the judiciary, and also with the military kind of systems that work with families and the military systems that work with legal issues, the JAG Corps, around, and being a subject matter expert with them about what child support regulations kind of impact their service members, and then being subject matter experts for child support workers about military regulations and military considerations. Our population-based services are, just very briefly, we do legal clinics on the military installations kind of on a monthly basis, our major military installations in Texas, presentations and briefings at Yellow Ribbon events, which are the Texas National Guard's kind of pre-deployment and pre-activation and post-activation for National Guard, veterans legal clinics, and then we also developed a deployment checklist for paternity, child support, and parenting time, kind of for service members who are getting ready to deploy, kind of things they need to think about as it relates to child support. One of the resources that we distribute regularly is a little pocket card, which has turned out to be much more effective than kind of big brochures, but a pocket card that we distribute at big deployment events. And so we are on military installations when brigades are deploying, so 5,000 service members and their dependents who may be coming through these deployment events. And this is really just to get them thinking about taking care of the child support and paternity and custody business before they are deployed. So, kind of in summary, there's some guidances that I think all states should consider when it comes to thinking about the connections between child support and military families. And one is for state and county child support programs to designate a child support military liaison, so that single point of contact, so that from state to state, we have someone we can reach out to who can help us work on military cases, but also so that when there's whether it's National Guard or Veterans Organization or in jurisdictions that have a military installation, the JAG Corps there, they would have a single point of contact in their with the local child support agency to reach out to. I think creating a child support checklist for military and veterans is a very simple, useful tool. Drafting an SCRA cover letter to accompany summons, so it's basically kind of a guide for service members so they understand how the Service Members Civil Relief Act protections interact with the child support or maybe the parenting time summons that they've received. And then also to think about developing family-friendly policy. For instance, thinking about how you release child support information to a person designated to have that authority by a military member. Can your state child support program, for instance, accept a power of attorney, or do they have to have some kind of agency-specific release form? And how do you get those release forms into the hands of the JAG officers that may be deploying with brigades? Another thing that I think states can do, especially those states that have significant military, active duty military populations or veteran populations, and that is providing technical training for all child support staff. So some training to help them understand the military kind of regulations, the military allowances. We did a training with all of our assistant attorneys general across the state on PTSD and how that might show up in the child support environment. And so someone from the Veterans Administration and Mental Health Resources came and did this training with our attorneys, and it was striking in how symptoms of PTSD could come across in the child support setting as a belligerent non-custodial parent, when really what it was PTSD kicking in there. So it was important to have that kind of training, educating the caseworkers on military issues, and then also doing outreach to JAG and military vet service providers, doing kind of a child support 101 to talk about, to kind of demystify some of what child support does for those providers that are within the military systems and having that interaction on a regular basis with service members. So with that, I think that's plenty of information kind of thrown out there all at once, and I'll turn it back over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Michael. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dan Savage. Dan is going to speak to us about a county-based program in the state of Colorado. Dan?
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about our efforts here in El Paso County, Colorado, based on Office of Child Support Enforcement 1115 grant that was awarded to the state of Colorado in 2010. The grant name is Operation Access to Active Duty Military, and the grant's purposes are to determine the gaps that exist in military provisions for service members and trying to bridge those gaps, and then to provide direct child support services to active duty members and their families, and identifying and educating the military on-base service providers so that they will have a better understanding of what the child support concerns are. In putting it together, the 3-year grant began in October of 2010, and El Paso County started implementation of the grant in early 2011. Colorado State monitors the grant by creating a steering committee that we had quarterly meetings at, and updated the state child support website to include a link so that service members could go directly to the state website and get information regarding child support. In El Paso County, what we then did was designate a military liaison to provide direct child support services and be the primary point of contact for all the local military providers. Outreach was conducted on a regular basis to the 4 Colorado Springs installations. We found that we had not established relationships in the past, so we needed to establish and strengthen relationships with the child support offices in order to start to do the outreach on base. My slide, which is not advancing here, Katie. My next slide is for 4 local installations, and we have installations for Fort Carson, which is primarily a Army military infantry base with over 25,000 troops. Peterson Air Force Base, which is 5,000 airmen. Schriever Air Force Base, which was the 50th Space Wing and kind of satellite command, which is 8,100 airmen and civilian staff. And then we also house the Air Force Academy, which has about 4,000 cadets and 3,500 military and civilian staff. What we did in our approach was, first and foremost, understand that we were entering into a different world, a military world with a very different culture that had its own priorities, its own rules, and its own language. So the question that we really needed to ask was how we could support the mission of the military. As Michael had mentioned earlier, one of the first things we needed to do was try to identify challenges that both active duty military and veterans were facing. And the things that we had found was that the divorce rate on troops that were returning or redeploying service members was 65%. So there was huge numbers of troops that were returning back to the El Paso County area without a whole lot of support and any extended family, and that many of them had experienced multiple deployments averaging over 18 months. veterans, on the other hand, that were being discharged after the multiple deployments faced multiple physical and mental health issues, a pretty high unemployment rate here in El Paso County. We're a little over 9%, and that because of the basic state-of-the-art transportation, rapid transition from combat back to the U.S. and then from the military to civilian life. In some cases, I was talking to veterans who had been in Afghanistan 72 hours earlier, and that were discharged in under a month. Again, my slides are not working. So what we did was, in gaining access to the installations, we initially went and did an introductory letter to the installation command, that is the commander of each of the 4 bases, and arranged meetings through the command to meet with JAG. JAG was kind of the gatekeeper. The Judge Advocate General was kind of the gatekeeper to allow us to provide services on the base. We had to explain the grant purposes, and they basically introduced us to and arranged meetings with the various service providers on the base. Army Community Services when it came to the Army base. Integrated Delivery Services was the Air Force component of that. And on all of the bases, we found that there was usually a domestic violence unit. And the DOD, Department of Defense, has now, on all bases, started to house military family life counselors to deal with the issues of adjustments, if you will, in military life when a soldier or airman deploy, special multiple deployments. So what we tried to do moving forward was continue contact with service members, providers, and the first meeting with the service providers was to kind of give them general information and contact information for our agency and give them a child support overview and educate them around the issues that their members were experiencing. Can we advance? Subsequent meetings with the service providers and their members was to continue trainings to the service providers, provide information to JAG regarding local child support practices. We found that most of the JAG officers were not familiar with local state family law and were unfamiliar with the local court practices. So they could provide general information to the service members, but had very little information regarding child support or family law for the individual state. Most of them actually were not licensed in the state where they were stationed. We also discovered that the deployment, the pre-deployment, and the redeployment briefings that occur on the base was an excellent opportunity to educate large numbers of troops. In the last 4 months, we've participated in over 5,000 service members being briefed at redeployment hearings, as Fort Carson here in El Paso is one of the main redeployment points in the country for returning members. We found that service providers were more prepared to deal with domestic violence and child welfare issues rather than child support concerns. And as a result of the meetings, they became more interested and more willing to cooperate with child support. We started to offer direct services on the base following these briefings to the service providers, and we now regularly meet at all over 3 of the 4 service installations that we have. We also have extended additional services to our community partners that involve parenting time mediation, employment services, and linkage to other community and veterans organizations that are in El Paso County. If we could advance the slides up to the role of military liaison. Child support military liaisons are meeting regularly with service members and their families on the installations and at our office. And essentially their role has become to interview applicants for child support services, conduct paternity testing both on the base and in our offices, expedited establishment of child support orders through Colorado's administrative process. We can assist service members and their families with community partnerships. and referrals to those agencies for the specific services that they offer. We've helped expedite medical support through TRICARE. As Michael mentioned, help negotiate the interstate child support concerns when a service member is dealing with one or two other states and needs assistance. And provide a single point of contact that allows the service members and the service providers to know who they need to contact with respect to child support issues. Trying to understand the military partnership, one of the things that Michael mentioned that we also found was that the military regulations are very vague and require very minimal support during a period of separation or pending divorce. So prior to the court-ordered obligations, it was very important that child support got involved early in the process in order to provide positive outcomes with respect to support and referrals to appropriate parenting time mediation. Child support can help expedite establishment, enforcement, and modification of the orders. And again, as Michael mentioned, modification for deploying or redeploying troops when there's very variety of changes in the income due to like combat pay, overseas pay, jump pay, hazardous duty pay. The child support order can change radically, and the time delay in modification. So we tried to do an expedited process in improving that. We also found that DFAS was an excellent and very consistent employer with regard to withholding, but it usually took at least 30 days for a new income assignment to be honored. So again, deployed and redeploying soldiers and airmen, child support is now expediting cases and situations where soldiers or airmen are about to be deployed or are returning from deployment. And we're doing this by expedited process serving or inviting the service member to come in and waive service, providing genetic tests both on base as well as in our office. If there's a stipulated order and both parties are in agreement, we can finalize that in a matter of days through our administrative process. Making sure that the dependents are enrolled in the TRICARE medical coverage for children that are born out of wedlock. And again, expedited modification of child support for orders both pre-deployment and post-deployment. We've also produced, the state of Colorado has produced a brochure for returning service members that highlight all of these services. In dealing with the military, of course, one of the things we've also had to do is face challenges for the veterans. The barriers that we faced, and Michael had covered some of them, very low employment rate, particularly with younger veterans, a host of readjustment issues, mental and physical health issues, separation from extended family, so no real extended family support. Mom, dad, the brother are not close by. Support obligation really not reflecting the current circumstances because it was based on military pay. Unpaid support in arrears and how to address those so that it doesn't bury the veteran with a huge both monthly support but also an arrears payment. Dependent TRICARE terminates when the service member leaves the military, so how do we cover medical insurance for the dependents? And then extended, very long periods for both VA and Social Security disability claims and benefits to be processed and awarded to the veteran. Moving forward, we're hoping that what we'll be able to do is offer employment training and opportunities for our community partnerships, continue to refer veterans for mental health and physical well-being through the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs. We have improved the mediation services, both for veterans and military families. We found that the most important piece was to continue to educate both military and veteran providers about child support issues. We really found that most of the service providers on base and many of the community providers were just not knowledgeable at all of the challenges that are facing military and veteran populations. We're going to continue our on-base services and ongoing veteran partnership or veteran agency partnerships. and continue to use an expedited process to modify child support orders so that we can get them to reflect current circumstances. Again, my apologies for the slides not working. My contact information is at the end. And I guess I will now hand it back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Dan. I will now share some remarks from legislators that are involved with military family issues. And as I said, they weren't able to join us in person today because they're working in their legislatures, but they shared these remarks with us so that we could share them with you. State Representative Cliff Rosenberger is currently serving his second term at the Ohio House of Representatives. He is a United States Air Force veteran also. In 2011, he sponsored Ohio House Bill 121. The law prohibits the court from finding that past, present, or possible future active military service is a change in circumstances that would justify modifying an existing custody order. The parents can delegate their visitation rights to a relative or another individual that's close to the child, and the non-deploying parent is required to facilitate contact with the deployed parent and the child while that deployed parent is deployed. And the deploying parent also can participate in any custody or visitation proceeding and present evidence by electronic means. Representative Rosenberger worked with the judicial branch early on to make sure that their concerns were addressed so that once the bill was introduced, there weren't any concerns by the judicial branch to address anything that was in that law. And the state didn't estimate any additional costs due to this change of law. Representative Tanya Pullen from Kentucky has served in the House of Representatives for 13 years. For the past 6 years, she's chaired the Veterans, Military Affairs, and Public Safety Committee of the House. Representative Pullen received the U.S. Department of Defense Award for leadership on public policy affecting service members and their families. And she's also a member of NCSL's Military and Veterans Affairs Task Force. During her legislative career, Representative Pullen has been working to assure that veterans receive the benefits that they have earned. She's worked to make Kentucky a state friendly to military and military service members. And she's worked over the past 6 years to assist Kentuckians who are deployed by removing any red tape, such as making sure that their driver's licenses or occupational licenses don't expire while they're deployed. And the law gave them an extended grace period to renew upon return from their deployment. During the 2013 session, which is still ongoing in Kentucky, her committee heard a bill assuring that, again, child support orders put into place during deployment are not permanent so that they can be adjusted when the deployment ends. So we'd like to thank you all for your participation. This has been a great webinar, and we hope that you'll join us for future webinars where we will delve into some other specific innovations states are implementing. You should see our NCSL contact information on this slide by emailing the email address in the bottom right-hand corner. You can also join our listserv that focuses specifically about child support and will help you stay current on child support policy in the state. And feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions beyond the webinar here. So now we will move on to our questions portion of the presentation. And as Rachel stated, feel free to type your questions into the chat box on the bottom left-hand corner. Or excuse me, right-hand corner. Michael mentioned that the main complaints from constituents, that they would have problems with connecting with resources, with their allowances, with paternity default, and the length of time for cases to be worked. Are there any state policies that would solve some of these problems, such as case processing times or paternity default?
So is that question to Michael? Or any?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, I mean, I think one of the things, probably the most common complaint is around how VA benefits and other military allowances are counted, and I think that's I don't know if there's a legal solution to that, but I do think there's a practical solution, and that it's important for the state child support agency to work with the JAG and the VA groups to educate them about what is countable and what's not countable, because oftentimes I think the service member or the veteran will be more receptive to and open to that information coming from their military expert, whereas they may see the child support agency as just out to get as much money as they can, or some lens like that. And so I think that's an important part of that, building connections between the civilian child support world and the military world. Dan mentioned the importance of connecting with the JAG, the Judge Advocate General staff on the military installations. And I think for any state that's considering this work, it's the first kind of step in building that partnership or making that connection is recognizing that the JAG, the attorneys that work in JAG, represent the service member. And many of those JAG attorneys have represented service members who are challenging child support obligations, and they may see the state child support agency as an adversary, not as a partner. And so it's kind of building some common ground between you and the child support world and the JAG. That's an important first step in them becoming kind of a translator of some of the civilian laws that impact the service members.
Thanks, Michael. Another question from one of our listeners is, what type of issues have you, Michael, or Dan encountered when dealing with other states? And how have you dealt with CEJ when it exists in other states? Either one of you can feel free to respond.
Dan, why don't you take that one since I answered earlier?
Well, actually, one of the things that we've tried to do here is get a list of different military contacts in the state. Going through the central registry will sometimes help. But I have found that building relationships with an individual at the state office that's kind of designated as military liaison, there was a push earlier last year to try and get a list of folks in each state that would kind of be willing to field those, as they're pretty unique challenges. What are you doing in Texas, Michael?
Very similar. It's one of the things that our three attorneys who are working specifically on this project have done, is really tried to, you find those practical points of contact in other states that can, track things down for you, and help address some of the court of continuing exclusive jurisdiction issues. And that was, I see that on the question, and because it gets confusing, especially when it comes to the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act and the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act. You have these two different uniform acts, and there's some confusion and differences in how it plays out. And so I think it's building that expertise and making the connections across state lines to help resolve some of those issues.
Well, again, I'd like to thank Michael and Dan for joining us, and for everybody else listening in on our webinar. As I said before, the webinar and PowerPoint will be available on our website at the beginning of next week. And if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending.